Clara Donovan thought her golden years would be filled with peace in the home she worked a lifetime to restore, but instead her daughter Celine and son-in-law Victor turned her life into a nightmare. They handed her a strict contract, demanding she become their unpaid maid and use her pension to cover their luxury lifestyle, while even Victor's domineering mother moved in and treated Clara as a servant. What began as a helping hand spiraled into full exploitation until Clara discovered the courage to fight back with the help of a lawyer and a true friend. The family drama exploded with shocking confrontations, desperate manipulations, and a battle for control inside Clara's own house. But in the end, she reclaimed not just her home but her dignity and freedom. If you want to know how one mother turned the tables on her own family, stay tuned as we dive into this gripping story. Before we begin, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let us step into the moment when Clara's nightmare began. Clara Donovan had spent more than 40 years working as a nurse, rising before dawn to care for others, while saving every dollar she could to maintain the grand Victorian house that had once belonged to her grandparents. The house was her pride, her sanctuary, and the proof that every sacrifice she had made in her life had been worth it. She had dreamed of spending her later years there in peace, tending to her small garden, reading in the sunroom she had restored with her own hands, and welcoming her grandson for Sunday dinners. But those dreams were shattered one ordinary afternoon when her daughter Celine appeared in the living room with a folder of papers and a look of cold determination that made Clara's stomach tighten. Celine, 34 years old, ambitious, and always concerned with appearances, sat down across from her mother and placed the folder on the coffee table as if it were an official court document. Victor, her husband, leaned lazily against the doorway, phone in hand, a smirk curling his lips. Clara thought for a fleeting moment that maybe Celine was finally repaying her kindness with some surprise, perhaps arranging a family vacation or a special event. But when Celine pulled out the papers and spread them neatly in front of her, Clara realized this was no gift. "Mother, starting tomorrow," Celine said firmly, "these are your new responsibilities in this house." Clara blinked at the words, stunned by the tone. Not a suggestion, not a request, but an order. She picked up the top sheet, her hands trembling as her eyes scanned the lines. "Wake up at 6 to prepare breakfast. Get the child ready for school. Begin cleaning the house at 8. Laundry at 9. Lunch at 10. Hour by hour, the task stretched until nearly midnight, when she was expected to iron clothes for the next day. It was a schedule that belonged not to a loved mother or grandmother, but to a live-in maid. Her breath caught as Victor finally lifted his gaze from his phone and added in a casual voice, "And of course you will cover the household expenses with your pension. That is what it is for." Clara looked around the room in disbelief, her own home, filled with the echoes of her family's laughter and the memories of countless celebrations, now reduced to a stage for humiliation. She thought back to when Celine had been a child, when she had carried her on her shoulders, when she had nursed her through fevers, when she had worked double shifts to afford ballet lessons and birthday parties. And now that same daughter looked at her as though she were a burden. "You do not have much time to decide," Celine continued, her voice sharp and cool. "Victor has already spoken to a lawyer. Since we have been living here for over 2 years, we have rights. You can either stay and work under these conditions, or you can leave. But either way, we are not going anywhere." The words struck Clara like a physical blow. The deed was in her name. The house had been hers for decades, yet her own child was threatening her with legal blackmail. Either she became their servant, or they would take everything. "Think about it, Mother," Celine said as she painted her nails a glossy crimson. "At your age, where else would you go on a small pension? Here you have a roof, food, and your grandson. Unless you would rather live alone in some miserable little apartment." Victor chuckled, the sound cruel and dismissive. "Be realistic, Clara. What else are you going to do with your life? At least this way you will feel useful. It is better than sitting around watching television like other old women." In that moment, Clara's grandson, 8-year-old Julian, looked up from his tablet and asked innocently, "Grandma, are you going to make me a snack? I am hungry." He had no idea that his words landed like another stone on the weight crushing her heart. To him, she was already the cook, the caretaker, the one who always fixed things. Not his loving grandmother, but the house servant who happened to share his blood. Clara's mind swirled. She thought of all the sacrifices she had made, of the 40 years of service in hospitals, of the nights spent studying to advance her career, of the endless years of raising Celine alone after her husband had abandoned them. And now here she was treated as though none of it mattered. She dared to whisper, "Why must it be me? Why can you not share these responsibilities?" "Because you do not work," Victor answered without hesitation. "We work, we study, we have real duties. You only collect a pension. You contribute nothing productive." The words cut deep. Clara wanted to shout about every bill she had paid, every meal she had prepared, every late night she had spent watching her grandson, so that Celine and Victor could go out. But she knew the protest would only be dismissed. Celine leaned forward and placed a hand on her mother's shoulder, her touch heavy with condescension. "We love you, Mother. That is why we are giving you the chance to stay. But this house needs order, and someone has to be responsible. This is fair. Fair." The word echoed in Clara's mind, hollow and twisted. Was it fair that she was to be stripped of her dignity in the very home she had saved brick by brick? Was it fair that her love had been repaid with manipulation and threats? Her eyes fell on the papers again. The schedule, the rules, the cold declaration that she was no longer family but a worker, an unpaid servant. The living room where she had once dreamed of peace now felt like a prison cell. She wanted to tear the paper to shreds, to throw it in their faces, to scream at them to leave her home. But her body felt heavy, her voice trapped by fear and disbelief. What if they were right? What if she had nowhere else to go? Her granddaughter Amelia, only 6, tugged at her sleeve, asking for cookies from the top shelf. Celine quickly interjected, "Not now, Amelia. Your grandmother has to follow her schedule. If you want something, you must wait until the correct time." Clara felt her knees weaken as she walked toward the kitchen. Each step seemed to carry her deeper into an abyss she could not escape. She opened the pantry and found almost nothing, just scraps left over from meals that no one else had wanted. Even the refrigerator mocked her with its emptiness, except for the expensive items Celine claimed for herself and the beer Victor had bought. Celine's footsteps echoed behind her as she pinned another list to the refrigerator. "Here is the grocery list, Mother. It comes to about $150. You will need to go early tomorrow. And do not forget Victor's special protein powder and the children's vitamins." Clara stared at the list, her pulse racing. $150, nearly a quarter of her pension for food that would vanish in a week. She whispered that she could not afford it, that her pension would not stretch that far. Celine sighed as if she were scolding a child. "Mother, do not be selfish. You eat here too. We need to save our money for the future. It is only right that you handle the basic costs." Clara felt the words crush what little strength she had left. Her pension, her savings, her home, all swallowed by demands dressed as fairness. She looked at the crumpled schedule still clutched in her hand. It felt like a death sentence written in ink. Yet somewhere deep inside, a spark of resistance flickered. She could not name it yet, but it was there, buried beneath the fear and sorrow. That night she lay awake in the attic room they had already prepared for her, listening to the house that no longer felt like hers. And as the clock struck midnight, she whispered to herself the question that refused to be silenced. What if I simply said no? Clara awoke the next morning with a knot in her stomach. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains of the attic room, but the warmth that once comforted her felt distant, almost mocking. She had spent a restless night staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the creaks of footsteps below, the laughter of Celine and Victor, the sound of her grandson running down the hallway. It was her house, yet she felt like an intruder in a boarding house where she had no voice. She sat up slowly, the mattress beneath her hips, far thinner than the one she had slept on for decades in the master bedroom. The room was barely wide enough to fit the small bed and a rickety dresser they had shoved against the wall. She brushed her hair with trembling fingers and stared at the single photo she had rescued from her old room, a picture of her and Celine when Celine was 6 years old, both of them smiling in front of the very house that now felt like a prison. Clara wondered when the little girl who had once clung to her hand had hardened into the woman who now saw her as disposable. Descending the stairs, she passed the living room. Once filled with antique chairs, carefully polished wooden tables, and bookshelves lined with novels she had collected since college, it was now cluttered with Victor's electronics. A giant flat screen hung crookedly on the wall where her family portraits had been. Wires and video game consoles sprawled across the floor, the once proud Persian rug stained and frayed. The oak coffee table she had cherished now bore scars from countless careless cups. The house no longer spoke of her sacrifices or memories, but of someone else's careless indulgence. In the kitchen, Celine stood in silk pajamas scrolling on her phone, while Victor nursed a mug of coffee as though the world owed him silence. Without looking up, Celine slid a new paper across the counter. "Mother, here is the shopping list for today. We are counting on you to have everything ready by the evening. Julian has a school project, Amelia needs snacks for her classmates, and Victor has specific dietary needs for his training." Clara glanced at the list. Imported coffee, organic fruits, expensive cereals, specialty meats. The total would be another $150, nearly identical to yesterday's demand. "My pension will not stretch this far," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. Celine finally lifted her eyes, cool and sharp. "You are not listening, Mother. This is about the family. You are part of this family, which means you must contribute. You do not have rent to pay. You do not have the same responsibilities we do. We are building a future. All we ask is that you help keep the present in order." "All you ask," Clara thought bitterly, though she dared not say it aloud, "is everything." Victor sipped his coffee, smirking. If she cannot handle it, maybe she should consider selling this old house and moving into a senior community. But then, of course, she would not see the grandchildren every day. The words were wrapped in casual suggestion, but the threat was clear: either submit or be cut off from the only family she had left. By mid-morning, Clara had gathered the courage to walk through the garden she had once tended with pride. The flower beds were overgrown weeds, strangling the roses she had planted in memory of her late mother. Victor had left rusting tools scattered across the lawn, while Celine's abandoned yoga mat lay crumpled near the back porch. Clara bent down and touched the petals of a single rose still blooming despite the neglect. She felt a pang of sorrow for the garden and for herself. Both had been lovingly nurtured for years, only to be abandoned and disrespected. The rest of the day blurred into the monotonous rhythm of labor. She scrubbed floors already scuffed with new dirt. She washed piles of laundry, each load heavier than the last. She ironed shirts she had not worn, cooked meals she would barely taste, and managed chores that seemed endless. At each turn, Celine hovered, offering corrections and condescending remarks. "Do not forget to fold Julian's uniforms a certain way. Mother, you are not using enough lemon in the marinade. Please stop leaving your own books in the living room, they clutter the space." By evening, Clara's body ached, but she pressed on, clinging to the fragile belief that perhaps if she did everything perfectly, the hostility would lessen. But as she placed dinner on the table, Victor barely glanced at the plates before complaining. "This meat is too dry. And where is my special dressing? I told you I wanted it ready." Clara bit her lip, swallowing the retort that threatened to escape. She lowered her head and cleared the plates without a word. Later, as the family watched television in the living room, Clara tried to slip upstairs to her cramped attic room, but Celine stopped her. "One more thing, Mother. Starting this Sunday, we need you to find something to do outside the house. Sundays are family days for us, and we need privacy. You can go to church, visit a friend, take a walk. Just do not be here." Clara stared at her daughter in disbelief. "But Sundays were always my days with Julian and Amelia. We cooked together, we played games, we watched movies. It was our tradition." Celine's smile was cold. "Traditions change. The children need time with their parents. You have had enough of them." Clara felt her throat tighten as she retreated to the attic. She lay on the thin mattress, staring at the shadows creeping across the ceiling, wondering how much more of herself she would lose if she kept silent. The attic was quiet, but her mind was loud, filled with memories of laughter that once filled the house, of warm dinners and affectionate embraces. Now those memories seemed like ghosts haunting the hollow shell of her life. Around midnight, she heard a faint sound from the kitchen. Rising quietly, she tiptoed down the stairs and found Victor raiding the pantry. He was eating cereal straight from the box crumbs, scattering across the counter she had scrubbed only hours earlier. "Victor, that is for the children's breakfast," she whispered. He looked up, his eyes hard. "Do not be dramatic. You can buy more tomorrow." He left the empty box behind, as if it were nothing, retreating to the bedroom that had once been hers. Clara cleaned the crumbs in silence, her hands trembling, her chest heavy with despair. That night she realized with painful clarity that no matter how much she gave, it would never be enough. Her house was no longer her refuge. Her sacrifices were invisible. Her dignity was being stripped away piece by piece. But as she returned to the attic, her heart pounding, a small flame of resistance flickered again. She clutched the photo of her and Celine, whispering to the child in the frame, not the woman downstairs, "I cannot live like this forever. Something has to change." Her words were barely a breath, but they carried the weight of a vow that would soon lead her to choices Celine and Victor never imagined. Clara woke the next morning already exhausted, as though the weight of the previous day had seeped into her bones. The attic room was stifling, the thin window barely letting in air. She sat up slowly, her body aching from scrubbing floors and carrying loads of laundry. She had once believed retirement would give her peace time to read novels and sip tea in the sunroom she had restored with her own hands. Instead, each day now felt like a shift in an endless job where she was never paid, never thanked, only criticized. When she walked down to the kitchen, Celine was already waiting with another folded sheet of paper. "Mother, we have revised your schedule," she said, as though she were a manager speaking to an employee. "We realized some things were not working smoothly. From now on, laundry must be done twice a day. Julian needs clean uniforms, and Victor requires his workout clothes ready at all times. And dinners need to be served earlier. Victor has digestive issues if he eats too late." Victor, still in his pajamas at 10 in the morning, smirked from the living room sofa. "Also, I work from home on Tuesdays. I will need quiet during my rest periods. So if you could avoid noisy chores during the afternoon, that would be ideal." Clara wanted to laugh at the absurdity. A schedule that already stretched from 6 in the morning to midnight now included laundry twice daily and silent cleaning sessions, yet she bit her tongue and nodded. By noon, she was carrying bags of groceries into the kitchen, her pension already dwindling after paying for Celine's endless lists. Organic fruit, imported cheese, protein powders, vitamins for the children, special coffee blends, Victor insisted on. Her hands trembled as she looked at the receipt. Nearly half of her monthly pension gone in only 2 weeks. Celine swept into the kitchen, inspecting the bags like a queen reviewing her servants. "Mother, where are the fresh strawberries I asked for? And did you get the gluten-free bread?" "Victor cannot tolerate the regular kind." "I could not afford both," Clara whispered. Celine sighed dramatically. "You know, Mother, this is exactly why Victor and I are saving for our own house. If we had to rely on you for everything, we would starve. Honestly, you should be grateful we are still here. At least this way you are not alone. Grateful." The word twisted inside Clara like a knife. The next week blurred into a cycle of exhaustion. She rose at dawn, prepared breakfast, dressed Julian and Amelia for school, walked them to the bus stop, returned to clean the house, then prepared lunch for Victor, who never seemed to leave his phone yet, always claimed to be under unbearable prime. Stress. Every evening she cooked elaborate dinners while Celine hovered, pointing out flaws. Every night she collapsed into the thin mattress in the attic, her muscles burning. One evening, as she folded laundry, Victor strolled into the room holding one of his shirts. "This is wrinkled," he said flatly. "Do it again." Clara looked at him, her hands trembling with fatigue. Victor the first have been ironing for hours. Could it not wait until morning? He smirked, tossing the shirt onto the pile. "If you cannot manage simple tasks, maybe you should reconsider how useful you really are in this house." The implication was clear. She was replaceable even in her own home. The true breaking moment came a week later. Celine swept into the kitchen, dressed in a red dress Clara had never seen before. Her hair styled, her makeup perfect. "Mother, Victor and I will be gone this weekend," Celine announced, casually pouring coffee into the mug Clara's late husband had given her on their 5th anniversary. "We booked a hotel downtown. We need time to reconnect. You will watch the children and take care of everything here." Clara nearly dropped the dish she was holding. "The whole weekend? And with what money did you pay for this hotel?" Celine laughed lightly, the sound artificial. "Victor received a bonus at work. We deserve a little escape after all our stress. And you love spending time with Julian and Amelia. Do not act as if it is a burden." Clara swallowed her anger, but inside her chest, something cracked. It was not the request itself. She adored her grandchildren, but the way it was framed, as though she had no choice, as though her time and labor were not her own. The weekend was a nightmare. Julian spilled orange juice on the rug, and when Clara went to clean it, she realized she had no proper cleaning supplies left. She walked to the supermarket with both children in tow, spending $30 on detergents she could hardly afford. At the store, Julian begged for the expensive cereal his father liked, while Amelia pleaded for the cookies Celine always promised. Clara made desperate calculations in her head, weighing food against her medication, the children's desires against her survival. When they returned home, a message from Celine waited on her phone. "Mother, remember to buy fresh vegetables for when we return. The kitchen must be fully stocked." By Sunday evening, Clara was on her knees, scrubbing the floor, her back throbbing, sweat running down her face. She had prepared meals, managed homework, entertained the children, and still the house did not feel good enough. That night, when Celine and Victor returned glowing from their weekend, Clara could barely stand. Celine inspected the house critically. "Mother, you missed dusting the shelves in the dining room. And why is the refrigerator not completely full? We cannot come home to emptiness after such a stressful trip." Clara looked at her daughter, her heart breaking. Was this truly the child she had raised alone? The child she had sacrificed everything for? The next morning, the situation worsened. Victor's mother, Eleanor, arrived unannounced, her suitcases dragging across the porch. She swept inside like royalty, her eyes scanning the house with disdain. Finally, she declared without greeting Clara, "This house needs adjustments. I will take the master bedroom. I have dietary restrictions, so you will need to prepare special meals for me. Also, the curtains in that room must be changed immediately. They are far too dark." Clara stood frozen. The master bedroom that had once been hers was already Celine and Victor's. Now even that was being handed to Eleanor. Victor appeared behind his mother, placing an arm around her shoulders. "Mother will be staying with us for a while. She is lonely after my father's passing. I am sure you understand." Understand. Another word used like a weapon, a demand disguised as reason. That night, Clara lay awake in the attic, the voices of Celine, Victor, and Eleanor drifting upward. They spoke about redecorating, about money. Clara would have to spend, about rules she would need to follow. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the steady drum of her heart. It was tired, yes, but still strong. Stronger than she had realized. She whispered into the dark, the words trembling but resolute. "They are turning me into a ghost in my own home. But this cannot continue. It will not continue." Her vow was quiet, but it burned with the intensity of a spark ready to ignite. Clara woke before dawn the next morning, though she had barely slept. Her body ached from the chores of the previous day, but it was not only fatigue that weighed on her. It was the knowledge that a stranger now slept in the master bedroom of her own house, a bedroom she had carefully painted years ago, a bedroom where she had grieved her husband's death and dreamed of watching her grandchildren grow. Now it belonged to Eleanor, Victor's mother, who had swept in the night before, with the entitlement of a queen taking possession of her throne. Clara tiptoed down the stairs, hoping for a moment of quiet before the day began. But as she entered the kitchen, Eleanor was already there, dressed in a satin robe and feathered slippers, her hair pinned in perfect waves. She was seated at the table as though she had lived there for years. "You are late," Eleanor said, without looking up from the magazine in her hands. "I need 2 scrambled eggs, no oil, whole wheat toast, lightly browned, and coffee that is more like tea than coffee. And do not forget fresh fruit. Only perfectly ripe bananas will do." Clara froze. "Eleanor, I do not have fresh fruit in the house today. I will need to buy some later." Eleanor lowered the magazine, her eyes flashing. Unacceptable. A household should always have the basics. "Did Victor not tell you about my dietary needs? You will need to shop immediately. I cannot live in a place where such simple things are neglected." Before Clara could answer, Victor entered the kitchen, adjusting his tie. "Mother, what is the problem?" Eleanor gestured toward Clara. "Your housekeeper does not have proper food in the house. How am I supposed to have breakfast?" "Housekeeper." The word landed like a slap. Clara's throat tightened, but she said nothing. Victor sighed as though speaking to a stubborn child. "Clara, why did you not plan better? Go to the supermarket right away and buy what Mother needs. Use your pension money. That is what it is there for." Clara's voice shook as she answered. "I spent everything this weekend on groceries and cleaning supplies. I do not have money left for extras." The silence that followed was suffocating. Eleanor stared at her as if she had spoken blasphemy. Victor's jaw tightened. Then Celine walked in, still in her silk pajamas, her eyes narrowing. "Mother, is it true you are refusing to buy food for Eleanor? After everything she has been through after losing her husband, you would deny her basic comfort." "I am not refusing," Clara whispered. "I simply do not have the money right now." Celine shook her head with disappointment, always exaggerating about money. How much could breakfast cost? $10. 15. "Do not tell me you cannot afford that." Clara's heart pounded. Every word was a trap. If she agreed, she would lose what little she had left. If she resisted, she would be painted as cruel and selfish. By mid-morning, she found herself walking to the supermarket with Eleanor's list in her pocket, her steps heavy, her chest burning with humiliation. But instead of heading straight for the produce aisle, Clara turned toward the pharmacy where she knew there was an ATM. She withdrew $200 from her savings account, money she had promised herself she would never touch, except in emergencies. But as she clutched the bills, she realized this was the greatest emergency of her life. From there, she walked not to the supermarket but to a lawyer's office she had seen advertised in the local paper. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, greeted her. "Do you need an appointment?" "Yes," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is an emergency." By 9 o'clock, she was seated across from Attorney James Whitaker, a man in his 50s with silver streaks in his beard and eyes that seemed to have seen every kind of sorrow. Clara poured out her story in a rush: the schedule, the demands, the threats, the arrival of Eleanor. She spoke until her throat ached, as though a dam had burst. James listened without interruption, then leaned back with a grave expression. "Mrs. Donovan, what you are describing is not simply unkind, it is abuse. More specifically, elder exploitation. You are the legal owner of your home. They have no right to impose conditions, no right to force you to pay their expenses, and certainly no right to bring in additional residents without your consent." Clara felt as though a weight had lifted from her chest. For months she had doubted her own reality, wondering if perhaps she was being dramatic. Now for the first time someone confirmed her truth. "What can I do?" she asked. James outlined her options. "We will draft legal notices today. Celine and Victor will be required to pay rent at market value if they wish to contribute equally to expenses and respect your authority as homeowner. As for Eleanor, she has no agreement with you. She must vacate within 48 hours. If they resist, we can pursue eviction through the courts and file charges of elder exploitation." The words were both terrifying and exhilarating. Clara realized she had power she had forgotten she possessed. By the time she left the office, letters in hand, she felt like a different woman. She was still trembling, but now it was not only fear, it was resolve. When she returned home just before noon, Eleanor was in the living room giving instructions to Celine about curtain colors. Victor was on the phone pacing. None of them noticed the documents Clara carried until she placed them firmly on the coffee table. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "All of us. Right now." The room fell silent. Celine frowned. Victor ended his call. Eleanor crossed her arms, her lips tight. "I have spoken with a lawyer," Clara continued, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "These are legal notices. Celine and Victor, if you wish to stay here, you will pay $1,200 in rent and half of all expenses. Eleanor, you have 48 hours to leave. This is my home. My rules will be respected." The shock on their faces was almost satisfying. Celine's mouth opened and closed, like a fish, tears quickly springing to her eyes. Victor's face darkened with rage. Eleanor looked as though someone had slapped her. "You cannot do this," Celine cried, grabbing her letter. "We are your family. I am not kicking you out," Clara said evenly. "I am giving you the choice to stay under fair conditions. If you refuse, then yes, you will leave, but I will no longer be your servant." Eleanor stood abruptly, her voice trembling with indignation. "This is madness. You will regret this." Clara held her ground. For the first time in years, she felt the strength of her own name, her own ownership, her own dignity. The confrontation had only begun, but a new chapter of the battle for her home was underway. The living room was silent, but the tension was heavy enough to choke. The legal letters lay on the coffee table, their weight greater than the ink and paper they were made of. Celine clutched hers with trembling fingers, her face pale with shock. Victor paced like a caged animal, muttering under his breath. Eleanor sat rigid on the sofa, her chin lifted high, though her eyes darted with unease. Clara remained standing, her back straighter than it had been in years. She had spent too long bent beneath the weight of their demands. Now she would no longer bow. Mother Celine finally whispered, her voice shaking. "How could you do this to us? After everything we have done for you?" Clara's lips curled into the faintest smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Done for me? You mean moving into my house, spending my pension, and treating me like your maid?" "Yes, Celine, you have done so much." Celine's eyes filled with tears. "We only wanted to help you, to give you purpose. You were lonely before we came. This family was empty. We brought life back into it." Clara's heart ached at the manipulation. Life is not noise and chaos. Life is love and respect, and neither of those has been in this house for a long time. Victor stopped pacing and leaned toward her, his voice rising. "This is ridiculous. We have rights. We have lived here for 2 years. That makes us tenants, and tenants cannot be evicted without a fight." Clara did not flinch. "You are welcome to test that in court. My lawyer assures me you will lose. And do not forget, Victor, that what you have done to me is called elder exploitation. That is a federal crime. Are you sure you want to walk down that path?" The color drained from Victor's face, though his anger remained. "You are threatening your own family with prison." "I am not threatening," Clara said calmly. "I am explaining the consequences of your actions. The choice is yours." Eleanor let out a dramatic gasp. "This is shameful. To treat your daughter and her husband this way, and me, your guest, as if we were criminals. You are clearly losing your mind, Clara." Clara turned her gaze on her. "No, Eleanor. For the first time in years, I am clear. You came into my house uninvited, demanded my bedroom, and treated me like a servant. You have 48 hours to leave. Not a minute longer." The older woman opened her mouth to argue, but fell silent when she saw the steel in Clara's eyes. The confrontation stretched until the sound of the front door opening broke it. Julian and Amelia rushed in their backpacks, bouncing their voices, filling the room with innocent laughter. "Grandma, Grandma, guess what happened at school?" Amelia squealed, running to hug Clara's legs. Clara bent down, hugging her tightly, her throat thick with emotion. She looked up at Celine, who was still clutching her letter. For a moment, mother and daughter locked eyes, the weight of the generations between them pressing like a storm. "We will talk later," Celine muttered, her voice sharp with a mix of fear and anger. She turned to the children with a forced smile. "Go do your homework. The adults are having a discussion." The children skipped away, oblivious to the war unfolding around them. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Celine came to Clara's attic room. She closed the door softly, her face pale and blotchy from crying. "Mother, please," she whispered. "We cannot pay that kind of rent. $1,200 plus expenses, it is impossible. You know Victor is still getting his business off the ground, and my salary barely covers the basics. If you force us to leave, we will have nowhere to go." Clara sat on the edge of her narrow bed, folding her hands in her lap. "You had money for hotels and designer clothes. You had money for gourmet groceries and gadgets. You only never had money when it came to contributing to this house." Celine's tears fell, but Clara did not move to comfort her. She had learned that her daughter's tears were weapons carefully drawn when needed. "You will regret this," Celine whispered, her voice sharp now. "You will lose us. You will lose your grandchildren. Is that what you want?" Clara felt the words like daggers, but she steadied her breath. "I do not want to lose you, Celine. But I will not lose myself to keep you. If you stay, it will be under the new rules. If you leave, then so be it. The choice is yours." Celine stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time, then turned and fled the room, her footsteps echoing like thunder down the hallway. The days that followed were filled with unbearable tension. Eleanor stomped through the house like a general inspecting her troops, though her demands grew quieter as the deadline for her departure approached. Victor sulked and muttered, slamming doors and speaking loudly on the phone about his supposed legal rights. Celine alternated between icy silence and dramatic pleas, begging Clara to reconsider, to show mercy, to remember that family should come before rules. But Clara held firm. Every night she reread the letters, reminding herself of her lawyer's words, reminding herself that she was not crazy, not selfish, not cruel. She was reclaiming what was hers. On the second morning, Eleanor appeared in the living room with her suitcases packed. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she announced, "You will never see me again. You will die alone in this house, Clara, and you will regret driving your family away." Clara said nothing. She simply opened the front door and waited until Eleanor stormed out. When the door shut, a strange quiet settled over the house. Clara stood there, her hand on the knob, and realized for the first time in years that she had enforced a boundary, a line that would not be crossed. But the battle was far from over. That night, Victor confronted her in the kitchen, his voice low and venomous. "You think you have won, but you have not. We will not leave. We will fight you every step of the way. Celine is your daughter. She will never forgive you for this betrayal. And when she turns the children against you, you will finally know what it feels like to be alone." Clara looked at him, her heart steady, her voice calm. "I have been alone before, Victor, but I will never again be a prisoner in my own home." Victor's face twisted with rage, but he said nothing more. He stormed out of the kitchen, his footsteps heavy. Clara stood there in the quiet, her hands trembling, but not with fear, with resolve. She had lost so much already, but she would not lose her dignity. Not again. She walked upstairs, passing the closed doors of her grandchildren's rooms. For them, she thought. For them, she had to stand firm. They deserved to see what true strength looked like. They deserved to learn that love was not exploitation, and that family did not mean slavery. And as she returned to her attic room, she whispered to herself, "The storm has only begun, but I will not be swept away this time." The day after Eleanor left, Clara awoke with a strange sensation she had not felt in years. The attic room was still small, the mattress still thin, yet she felt lighter. For once she had drawn a line and held it. But the victory was fragile. Downstairs she could hear Victor's heavy footsteps and Celine's muffled sobs. The house was a battlefield, and Clara knew the war was not over. At breakfast, Celine sat with swollen eyes staring into her coffee. Victor scrolled furiously on his phone, muttering about legal rights and tenant protections. Clara placed a simple plate of toast and eggs on the table without a word. Mother Celine began softly, her voice weak. "I hope you realize what you have done. You humiliated Eleanor. You are pushing us away. If you continue like this, you will lose your family." Clara sat opposite her daughter and folded her hands. "Celine, I do not want to lose you, but I refuse to lose myself any longer. This house is mine. My money is mine. If you want to stay, you will respect that." Victor slammed his phone onto the table. "You are bluffing. You think a piece of paper from some lawyer changes anything. We have been here for 2 years. That makes us tenants. You cannot evict us without going through the courts." Clara met his glare with calm eyes. "Then we will go to court. And when we do, I will also file charges for elder exploitation. That is not a bluff, Victor. That is the law." For a moment the room was so quiet Clara could hear the ticking of the old wall clock. Victor's face darkened, but he said nothing. Celine looked between them, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. Later that morning, Clara slipped out of the house with a purpose. She carried her worn leather purse, inside of which rested the remaining documents Attorney Whitaker had given her. When she arrived at his office, he greeted her with a warm handshake. "Mrs. Donovan," he said, guiding her into the same office where she had poured out her story days earlier. "I take it the notices were delivered." Clara nodded. "Eleanor is gone, but Celine and Victor are resisting. Victor insists they have tenant rights. He is threatening me." James leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowing. "This is common. They are trying to intimidate you, but the facts are clear. They have not paid rent, they have exploited your finances, and they have imposed unfair labor on you. That is not tenancy. That is abuse." Clara exhaled, the weight on her chest easing. What should I do next? We will file a formal eviction if they refuse to leave within the 30-day period, James explained. In the meantime, you must protect yourself financially. Do you still have joint accounts with your daughter? Clara's face flushed with shame. Yes. Celine uses my credit card for emergencies. She says she will repay me, but she never does. James's voice hardened. Then that stops today. Go to your bank. Remove her as an authorized user. Change your account codes. Make sure only you have access. Every dollar you save now is protection against them. Clara left his office with instructions ringing in her ears. She went directly to the bank, her legs trembling but her resolve unshaken. The manager, a woman about her age, listened sympathetically as Clara explained she wanted all accounts secured under her name alone. Within an hour, Celine's access was gone. Clara walked out with a new card, her money safe at last. As she walked home, she felt the first taste of freedom in years. For once, she was not financing Victor's indulgences or Celine's luxuries. For once, she was reclaiming her life. When she returned, Celine was waiting in the kitchen, her phone in hand, her face tight with anger. Mother, why did my card stop working? The grocery store said it was declined. I was humiliated. Clara placed her purse on the counter and looked her daughter in the eye. Because it was my card, Celine. My account. From now on, if you want groceries, you will buy them with your own money. Celine's voice cracked. We do not have enough. You know that. How can you be so cruel? Clara steadied herself. Cruel is forcing your mother to spend her pension while you and your husband save for a dream house. Cruel is treating me like a maid instead of family. I will not do it anymore. Celine's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. She dropped into a chair, sobbing loudly. You are tearing this family apart. Do you not love us anymore? Do you not love your grandchildren? Clara's voice softened, though her resolve did not. I love you more than you can imagine. That is why I am doing this. Because love without respect is not love. It is slavery. The following days were a storm. Victor alternated between shouting and silence, slamming doors and muttering threats. Celine cycled through guilt, tears, and cold disdain. Julian and Amelia watched in confusion, sensing the tension but not understanding its depth. One evening, Clara found Julian standing in the hallway, his small brow furrowed. Grandma, he asked quietly, why is Mommy crying all the time? Did you do something bad? Clara knelt and cupped his face. No, my love. Grown-ups sometimes have problems, but remember this. Loving someone never means letting them treat you badly. Do you understand? The boy nodded slowly, though his eyes remained clouded. Clara hugged him tightly, her heart breaking that her grandchildren were caught in the middle of this battle. At the end of the week, Clara returned to James's office. She handed him a folder of receipts, bank statements, and the written schedule Celine had once given her. He reviewed them with grave concentration. This is strong evidence, he said finally. If they continue to resist, we can file charges. You have been exploited financially and emotionally. You have been threatened in your own home. The law is on your side, Clara. For the first time, Clara believed it. That evening, she returned home with a new clarity. She entered the living room, where Victor lounged on the sofa with his phone, and Celine sat beside him, her eyes red from another round of tears. Clara stood before them, her shoulders square. You have 23 days left, she said simply. You may stay under the new conditions or you may leave, but I will not waver, and if you try to intimidate me again, I will go to the court. Victor's face twisted. You think you are strong, but you are alone. When you are sick and frail, who will take care of you? The courts will not love you. The lawyers will not hold your hand. Clara's answer came steady and clear. I would rather hire strangers who respect me than live with family who enslave me. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Celine let out a sob. Victor stared at her with disbelief, but Clara felt only calm. For the first time in years, the fear had loosened its grip. As she turned and walked back to her attic room, her steps felt lighter, her spirit stronger. The battle was far from over, but she had allies now. She had her lawyer, her bank, and most importantly, her own voice. And deep inside, a new certainty bloomed. This war for her home and her dignity was not just about survival, It was about teaching everyone, including her grandchildren, that love without respect was no love at all. The atmosphere inside Clara's home had shifted. Though Celine and Victor still walked through the rooms with an air of entitlement, there was a tension that clung to every word, every glance. The legal notices were no longer forgotten papers on the coffee table. They were heavy reminders that the ground beneath them was no longer solid. Clara, meanwhile, carried herself differently. She still woke early, still cooked and cleaned, but now she moved with purpose rather than resignation. She was no longer waiting for permission to breathe. She was preparing for the moment when everything would come to a head. That moment came on a Saturday afternoon. Clara had just returned from the market, carrying a bouquet of daisies along with her groceries. It was the first time in years she had bought flowers for herself. As she placed them in a vase on the dining table, she heard raised voices from the living room. "You cannot just let her dictate everything," Victor hissed. "She is bluffing. No judge would side with her." Celine's voice broke through, sharp and strained. "But what if she is not bluffing, Victor? She went to a lawyer. She shut down the credit cards. She is serious this time." Clara stepped into the doorway, holding her ground. "You are right, Celine. I am serious." Both of them whipped their heads toward her. Victor sneered. "So, you were listening. Do you enjoy spying on us?" Clara lifted her chin. "I do not need to spy in my own house. If you want privacy, you can find it in your own home." Victor's face reddened and he rose from the sofa, towering over her. "This is our home too. We have lived here long enough to have rights." "Rights come with responsibility," Clara answered evenly. "You have paid nothing, contributed nothing, and treated me like a servant. That is not tenancy. That is exploitation." Celine stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Mother, stop this, please. Think about Julian and Amelia. Do you want to traumatize them by tearing this family apart?" Clara's heart twisted at the mention of her grandchildren, but she did not waver. What traumatizes children is watching their parents exploit their grandmother. What scars them is growing up believing love means control. I will not let them learn that lesson under my roof. Victor barked a bitter laugh. "So now you are some kind of hero. Do not kid yourself. Without us, you will be nothing but a lonely old woman in an empty house." Clara's voice was calm, but sharp as steel. "I would rather live alone in peace than surrounded by people who treat me as less than human." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of small footsteps. Julian and Amelia stood at the edge of the hallway, their eyes wide. "Why are you yelling?" Julian asked, his voice trembling. Clara moved past Victor and knelt to face the children. "We are having a very serious conversation," she said gently. "But I need you both to know something. In this house, no one is allowed to be treated badly. Not you, not me, not anyone." Amelia clutched her brother's hand. "Grandma, are we leaving?" Clara hesitated, then answered honestly. "That depends on your parents. If they choose to follow the rules, you can stay. If not, then yes, you will live somewhere else. But wherever you go, remember that I love you and I will always be your grandma." Celine rushed forward, pulling the children away. "Do not confuse them, Mother. This is between adults." "No, Celine," Clara said firmly. "It is not just between adults. They hear the shouting, they feel the tension, they deserve to know the truth." Victor slammed his fist against the wall, startling everyone. "Enough! You are poisoning them against us." Clara rose to her full height, her voice unwavering. "No, Victor. You poison them by showing them a version of family that is cruel and selfish. I am showing them another way." The children were ushered upstairs, their whispers echoing on the staircase. The living room became a battleground once more. Victor advanced on Clara, his jaw tight. "Do you really think a judge will side with you? We have been maintaining this property for years. We have rights." Clara pulled the crumpled schedule from her purse, unfolding it slowly. "This is what you call maintaining. Forcing a 68-year-old woman to work from dawn until midnight without rest. Making her pay every bill while you save for luxuries. This is not maintenance, Victor. This is slavery, and no court will defend it." Celine's tears spilled again, though her voice was sharp. "Why are you doing this, Mother? Why now? We have lived like this for years. Why suddenly turn against us?" Clara's throat tightened, but she forced the words out. Because I finally remembered who I am. Because I realized that love does not mean erasing myself so you can thrive. Because I will not die in this house as a shadow of who I used to be. Victor snarled, but for the first time there was uncertainty in his eyes. Clara pressed forward. You have 20 days left. You may stay under my rules or you may leave. If you choose to fight, then I will see you in court, and the charges of elder exploitation will follow you for the rest of your lives. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Celine's sobs filled the silence, while Victor stood frozen, his fists clenched but his confidence crumbling. For the rest of the evening the house was eerily quiet. Celine avoided Clara's eyes, while Victor brooded in the corner, his phone in hand. But Clara did not retreat to the attic. Instead, she sat in the living room, her flowers on the table beside her, reclaiming the space that had once been hers. Later that night, she heard soft footsteps. Julian appeared in the doorway, clutching a blanket. "Grandma, are you okay?" he whispered. Clara opened her arms and he rushed into them. She held him tightly, her eyes wet with tears. "Yes, my love, I am okay. For the first time in a long time, I am okay." As she tucked him back into bed, she realized the confrontation was far from over. Victor was too proud to back down easily, and Celine too afraid to let go of her control. But something had shifted. The illusion of their power had cracked. Back in her attic room, Clara whispered to herself, "The worst storm has passed, but the fight is not finished. Tomorrow the pieces will begin to fall." The days that followed the confrontation unfolded like the slow cracking of ice on a frozen lake. Every sound, every word, every silence felt dangerous, as if at any moment the entire surface of their lives might shatter beneath them. Clara carried herself differently now, no longer shrinking into corners, no longer apologizing for her existence. She walked through her home as its rightful owner, her steps steady, her head high. The change unsettled everyone. Victor grew more restless by the day. He stomped around the house, muttering about injustice, slamming doors and taking long phone calls that Clara suspected were nothing more than empty threats disguised as legal consultations. Celine was quieter, her eyes swollen from tears, her tone alternating between pleading and cold silence. The children sensed the storm moving cautiously through the house, whispering to one another when they thought no one could hear. On the 10th day, the pressure erupted. Clara was in the kitchen, humming softly as she kneaded bread dough, something she had not done in years. The simple rhythm calmed her nerves, reminded her that she could still create something nourishing with her hands. But the calm was shattered when Victor burst through the doorway, his face flushed, his phone clutched like a weapon. "I spoke with a lawyer," he announced, his voice dripping with false triumph. "He says we can claim tenancy. We have lived here more than 2 years. You cannot throw us out so easily." Clara wiped her flour-dusted hands on a towel and looked at him calmly. "Did your lawyer also tell you that tenants must pay rent? Did he mention that you have not contributed a single dollar to this house in all that time? Did he remind you that forcing an elderly woman to labor without pay is a crime?" Victor's smirk faltered. Clara pressed on. "My lawyer is prepared to take this to court, Victor, and unlike your internet searches and phone calls, his words carry weight. Are you prepared to see the phrase elder exploitation written in black ink on legal documents with your name beside it?" Victor's bravado crumbled. He turned away muttering, but Clara saw the fear flicker in his eyes. That evening, Celine tried another tactic. She came into the kitchen while Clara washed dishes, her voice soft, almost childlike. "Mother," she whispered, "we do not have anywhere else to go. Apartments are so expensive. We cannot pay what you are asking. Please, cannot we find another way?" Clara dried her hands and turned to her daughter. "You can stay here, Celine, but only if you follow the rules. Rent, expenses, respect. Nothing less. If you cannot, then you must find another place. I will not bend anymore." Celine's tears spilled, but Clara did not yield. She had spent a lifetime being moved by those tears, letting them guide her into sacrifice after sacrifice. But now she recognized them for what they were, a tool, not a truth. The following week was filled with small battles. Victor left dirty dishes on the table, daring Clara to clean them. She did not. Celine sighed loudly about the children's needs, hinting that Clara was failing them. Clara responded by spending time with Julian and Amelia on her own terms, reading stories, tending to the garden, teaching them simple recipes. For the first time, the children saw their grandmother as more than the servant who provided snacks on demand. They saw her as a person with stories, with patience, with love that was not transactional. Then came the moment that broke everything open. It was a Friday evening when Victor returned home in a fury. He had lost another job opportunity, though Clara suspected it was his arrogance rather than misfortune that was to blame. He stormed into the living room, shouting at Celine, blaming her for everything from the groceries to the tension in the house. "You let her control you," he roared, pointing toward Clara, who sat calmly with a book in her lap. "You are supposed to be my partner, not her puppet. You are pathetic." Celine's face crumpled, and for the first time Clara saw her daughter recoil from Victor's words as if they were blows. Clara stood slowly, closing her book. "This ends now," she said firmly. Victor whirled on her, his face twisted with rage. "You have poisoned her against me. You think you are so powerful with your lawyer and your papers, but you are just an old woman who will die alone." Clara stepped closer, her voice unwavering. "No, Victor. I am a woman who remembers her worth, and I will never again let anyone take it from me. You have 19 days left. Use them to find another place because you will not break me." The silence that followed was thick and electric. Celine stared at her mother, tears streaming down her face. Victor glared, his chest heaving, but he did not speak. The collapse had begun. Over the next week, their power unraveled piece by piece. Eleanor never returned despite her threats. Victor's bluster grew weaker, his shouts less frequent. He spent hours locked in the bedroom, making desperate calls that never seemed to yield results. Celine began packing small boxes, quietly slipping them into the trunk of her car when Victor was not looking. She no longer tried to guilt her mother. Instead, she moved through the house with the defeated air of someone who knew the fight was lost. One afternoon, Julian approached Clara in the garden. He sat beside her as she trimmed the roses that had finally begun to bloom again. "Grandma," he asked softly, "are we moving?" Clara set down her clippers and looked at him. "Yes, my love. Your parents will find another home soon." He frowned. "Will we still see you?" Clara smiled gently, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "Always. Nothing can change that." Julian nodded, his eyes serious beyond his years. "I am glad you are not sad anymore, Grandma." Clara hugged him tightly, her heart swelling with both sorrow and pride. Her grandson had seen her pain, but he would also see her strength. By the 19th day, the house was filled with boxes. Celine avoided Clara's gaze, while Victor moved with silent rage, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. But Clara did not cower. She moved through her home, freely arranging flowers in the dining room, cooking meals when she chose, resting when she pleased. On the morning of the 30th day, Clara awoke in her attic room for the last time. She dressed slowly, her hands steady. When she came downstairs, she found Celine and Victor standing in the hallway, their suitcases by the door, their children beside them. Celine's eyes were red. "Mother," she whispered, "I hope you know we always loved you." Clara studied her daughter for a long moment, then nodded. "Love without respect is not love. Remember that." Victor said nothing. He opened the door and ushered the children out. Celine followed, her shoulders slumped. The door closed behind them, and for the first time in years the house was silent. Clara stood in the living room, her flowers blooming on the table, the sunlight pouring in through the windows. The silence was not empty. It was peace. She exhaled slowly, a smile breaking across her face. The collapse of their control was complete. The house was hers again, not just the walls and the roof, but the spirit of it, the dignity of it. And so was her life. Clara woke on a quiet Saturday to the sound of sparrows in the maple tree outside her window. For the first time in a long time, the quiet did not feel like something missing. It felt like space. She lay still for a moment, listening to the soft breath of the house. The air seemed lighter. The silence no longer pressed against her chest. It lifted her instead, like a tide carrying her toward shore. She rose and opened the curtains. Morning light spilled across the polished floorboards of the master bedroom. Her bedroom again. She had spent the previous day moving her few boxes out of the attic and back into this room. The walls still wore the soft paint she had chosen years ago. The dresser she had restored with careful hands shone under the light. On the vanity she placed a framed photograph of her mother holding a bouquet from the old garden. It made the room feel complete. It made Clara feel seen. She showered without hurrying. No one banged on the door. No one called for breakfast or cleaned socks or missing notebooks. In the kitchen she brewed coffee the way she liked it, strong and simple. She sliced a pear. She warmed a piece of bread in the oven and spread it with butter. Then she did something she had not allowed herself to do in years. She sat at the table and ate while reading a book. Each page felt like a door opening back into a life she had left unfinished. After breakfast, she carried a pail and pruning shears to the garden. The work was gentle and steady. She trimmed dead branches from the roses and tucked new soil around their roots. She turned the earth in the herb bed and planted seeds she had bought the day before: basil, thyme, a little patch of mint for the pitcher on summer afternoons. Bees drifted over the blossoms. Sun warmed her shoulders. The garden had survived neglect, and so had she. Now both would grow. Around midday, her neighbor Margaret pushed open the gate and waved. She carried a paper bag from the bakery. "I brought scones," she said. "I thought today could use a small celebration." Clara laughed, surprised by how easily joy rose in her throat. They sat on the back steps with the bag between them. Buttered scones, hot tea, maple shade, the simple feast of an ordinary day. "How do you feel?" Margaret asked. "Like my name fits again," Clara said, "like my feet are on my own floor." They talked about small things at first: the weather, the new librarian at the branch down the street, the choir that met on Wednesdays at the community center. Margaret mentioned a watercolor class that needed one more person to open. "You used to paint, did you not?" she asked. "A long time ago," Clara said, "before shifts and bills and repairs and groceries, before schedules pinned to refrigerators." "Then paint again," Margaret said. "Use the time your courage has given back to you." In the afternoon, Clara walked to the market with a woven bag on her arm. She chose tomatoes that smelled like Sunday. She chose greens that snapped when folded. She bought a small bunch of flowers for the table. She paid with her own card and felt no ache of resentment, only the quiet pride of a person responsible for herself. When she returned, she found an envelope slipped through the mail slot. Her heart stuttered, then steadied. She opened it and saw Attorney Whitaker's letter. A brief update. The withdrawal of any claim to tenancy had been filed. No further action required. The words sat clean on the page, a line drawn, a door closed. She placed the letter in a folder in the desk. She breathed out slowly. The house seemed to breathe with her. That evening she cooked a simple meal: chicken roasted with lemon and rosemary, potatoes crisped in the pan, a salad with the tomatoes she had chosen. She set one plate, one glass. It should have felt lonely, yet it did not. It felt honest. After she ate, she carried her dish to the sink and washed it. The kitchen settled, a warm hush like a blessing. On Sunday morning, the doorbell rang. Clara opened it to find Julian and Amelia on the porch holding a note. Celine stood by the curb beside a small car, hands folded. She looked smaller than Clara remembered, more human. The note said the children would visit every other Saturday from 10 to 6, that Celine would pick them up and drop them off on time, that she would not enter the house without invitation. Clara recognized the formal cadence of Attorney Whitaker. She also recognized her daughter's uneven signature. "Hello, Grandma," Julian said. "We brought our puzzles." Clara knelt and hugged them. The embrace was clean of demand, no transaction hidden in the squeeze of arms, just the warmth of people who belong to one another. Inside, they spread the puzzle pieces on the dining table. They walked to the garden to see the roses. They ate sliced apples and little sandwiches. They talked about spelling tests and science projects and a school play that would need costumes. When Amelia asked if she could help water the mint, Clara placed the small can in her hands and stood back. The child poured slowly, her face serious, as if she were an apprentice to a delicate craft. At 4, they baked cookies with too many chocolate chips. At 5, they sat on the porch and watched the street drift by. When the car returned at 6, the children hugged her twice. "Will we come again?" Amelia asked. Every other Saturday, Clara said, and sometimes more if everyone is kind and on time. Celine stepped from the car and approached the gate. She stopped at the latch as if the small piece of metal marked a border she was not sure she was allowed to cross. "Thank you for today," she said. Her voice had none of the old edge. It sounded tired. It sounded real. Clara nodded. The children were happy. That is what matters. Celine looked at the house. Her eyes filled, then cleared. "I have found a small apartment," she said. "It is not what I imagined, but it is ours. I will send you the address for emergencies and for school things." Clara studied her daughter. She saw the proud chin, the familiar way she chewed her lip when she was frightened, the child who still lived beneath the woman. She did not offer to solve anything. She did not reach for her purse. She only said, "I hope you make it a good home." Celine nodded. For a moment she looked as if she might ask for something. Money. A week. A favor she would call small. Instead she drew a breath and said, "I am sorry for the ways I treated you. I do not expect you to forgive me. I only wanted to say it." Clara felt the apology land without fanfare. A stone placed where a stone belonged. "Thank you for saying so," she said. "We will see what time does." After the car drove away, the house was quiet again. But it was not the old quiet of erasure. It was the new quiet of choice. Clara washed the mixing bowls and put them on the rack. She wiped the flour from the counter. She placed the puzzle back in its box. Small rituals that made a place ready for the next day. On Monday, she walked to the community center and signed up for choir. She signed up for watercolor. She stood at the bulletin board and felt like a student again, a woman at the beginning of something rather than at the end. In the afternoon, she volunteered at the clinic. She read to an elderly man waiting for stitches. She held the hand of a woman who feared the result of a test. She listened in that quiet way nurses learn, the way that tells a person they are safe. That evening, she sat at the dining table under the lamp. She opened a blank sheet of paper and wrote a list. Not of chores, not of demands pressed into her hand by another. A list of her own making. Places to visit, books to read, repairs to schedule for the gutters. Invite Margaret for tea next Sunday. Find a frame for the drawing Julian made of the garden. Buy seeds for autumn greens. Call the library about the reading group. She looked at the list and smiled. The house seemed to smile with her. Days gathered themselves into a new pattern. Morning coffee, garden, errands that belonged to her alone. 2 choir rehearsals a week. Watercolor on Thursdays, the clinic on Fridays when they needed extra hands. On the second Saturday, the children came again. They decorated clay pots and planted the basil seedlings. They ate pasta with tomatoes and laughed when the sauce splattered. They helped wash the bowls and learned that a kitchen can be a place where work and love are the same motion. Sometimes she felt a flicker of grief for the years lost, for the attic nights, for the words she swallowed until they bruised her. When that ache rose, she did not push it away. She set it beside her like an old photograph and looked at it until it softened and became part of her story rather than the whole of it. One evening, she stood at the front window with the lamp off and watched the street. Cars moved like slow fish through a river of dusk. A boy on a bicycle chased his shadow. Somewhere a radio played a song from another decade. Clara touched the cool glass and felt grateful to be here, to be in the house she had kept through storms, to be in the life she had reclaimed with steady hands. She understood something now that words had never quite captured. Freedom was not loud. It did not always arrive with a shout. Sometimes freedom was the sound of a kettle rising to a soft whistle. Sometimes it was the feel of dirt under your nails from the garden you chose to tend. Sometimes it was the courage to tell the truth and then let the truth work. Before bed, she walked through each room and turned out the lights. The living room, the hall, the kitchen where a clean sink reflected the moon. At the bottom of the stairs, she paused and listened. The house creaked its familiar old bones. She smiled. Upstairs in the master bedroom, she sat at the vanity and brushed her hair. The mirror held her gently. A woman with bright eyes looked back. A woman who had been tired and was tired no longer. A woman who knew that love asks for kindness and that true kindness includes herself. She slid under the quilt and turned off the lamp. In the dark, she spoke a small promise out loud. Not a vow to anyone else, a vow to herself. I will not forget again. I will not vanish again. I will live. The promise settled. The house settled. The night gathered close and kind. And Clara slept not because she had finally escaped the world, but because she had finally come home to herself. In the end, Clara's story reminds us of something many forget. Love cannot exist without respect. Family cannot demand sacrifice at the cost of dignity. It is never too late to stand tall, to reclaim your voice, and to protect what is rightfully yours. Clara showed that courage does not always roar, it can also whisper no and mean it. Her journey teaches us that dignity once reclaimed is a treasure no one can take away again. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need this reminder. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were in Clara's place? I always love hearing your thoughts.